All right, ladies and gentlemen, today is October 19th. It is 2:03 p.m. here in San Diego, California. And this is my favorite conversation I get to have every couple months right here and now. Today on In the Fight, ladies and gentlemen, the one, the only, you all know him, Mr. Robin Black. Robin, how we doing?
Woo! I honestly like hanging out with you too, man. So thank you for the compliment. That is very generous, and I really appreciate the encouragement. But I really do like hanging out with you too. Every time it's great. No pressure.
But here's the truth, Robin, is I think we both really try to avoid certain narratives and stereotypes that go on in sports content creation. And not that MMA is sport, I guess. That's a kind of a tricky line to define, but I do think we both like to use a different perspective when analyzing, assessing, evaluating, whatever you want to call it. So I think
Debating, discussing, whatever. Yes.
however you want to go about it, I think we have that same conversation.
Yes. I will take it one step further and say that the language of sport has become so entrenched that it's actually become sort of a artificial language. I'm really lately in the last number of years, I'm obsessed with truth. Now that like I work for myself and I have partnerships and sort of gigs, I seem to be able to just try to find truth instead of trying to find narratives all the time. But I'm almost to the point there now where I think that the language of sport is astrology, and then say in fighting, for example, the language of corporate television MMA is astrology, and we're trying to find out what's the astronomy, what's the actual truth of the thing.
MMA has long battled with certain adversity in its upbringing, whether it be like funding, public support, political support, and they disguised a lot of it by making it appear as a normal sport, right? To solve some of those problems, we're going to wear uniforms. We're going to have press conferences where journalists would ask certain questions. And they've really tried to disguise it as sport, but I think when you strip all of that away, it's much more than that.
For sure. And the more you package it as a television corporate sport, the less honest it becomes. All when the UFC popped up, for example, they're the biggest in sort of modern combat sports, particularly at least this style of fighting. When they popped up, they were young, visceral, edgy, provocative, cool. And then they were like, wouldn't it be great if one day we were on ESPN? And in the process of creating a package so they could, they're no longer young. They are no longer non-corporate. They're no longer cool. Like, cool young people aren't the biggest UFC fans. And that goes to you and I too. We're not the coolest, right?
No, we're not.
No, we're not, right? And if somebody's offended by that, you might not be either. You just would like to be. Like, it's not our faults, but we're not the cool people, right? And they are no longer innovative. They're no longer provocative. They're no longer edgy. It's no longer young and rebel. They're the old man saying, "Oh, this bare knuckle thing is, whatever," right? Like, or Jake Paul's face. Like, we eventually become what we used to rebel against, and that's sort of what corporate fighting, the desire to package it like the NFL, has made corporate fighting kind of like that, and it's not punk rock anymore.
Oh my God, I can't believe you just said punk rock, because my exact words were going to be, it's just like a music band, right? This is a band that was hot, edgy, cool, that didn't listen or abide by the rules, and now they sold out to a label and want to sell albums, and they want to pay for their houses, and they want to go on tour to... But I do think there's a trade-off before we dive into all the fighting stuff that we want to get into. My mom would not have watched the UFC 15 years ago or 20 years ago. Yet last weekend, when Jared Gordon is fighting against Joe Selecki, she sees it and she goes, "Oh, Bo, that's the guy you had on your show," and she sits down to watch. So there is that trade-off of you do get to bring in some new fans.
For sure. And when you do, there is absolutely no reason that like there should have been a rise of YouTube boxing, a rise of bare knuckle fighting, all of these sort of wild different flavors of fighting. There was no room for that before, but now there is, because by appealing to your mom, you have inadvertently alienated your original fan base, which liked edgy, outside of the mainstream, innovative, different, had a different language, a different flavor, a different look, all of these things. When you commodify all of those things, and now you've got athletes in suits talking in code about striker versus grappler. This one's going to be fireworks on a TV where the same two guys come out. This is just what happens, right? I'm not mad at it. We don't need to judge rock. There was Tony Hawk was once a rebel. Now Tony Hawk is sort of the grand, but the cycle changes too. One day Dana White is again Tony Hawk, where he's kind of the grandfather. He's appreciated for his early, and same with George St. Pierre. More importantly, the fighters themselves. They are appreciated in the way that Tony Hawk is later appreciated. He's not cool. He's not innovative. He's not a badass. But eventually the world comes around and goes, this is the guy. And these are the people who begin. It's just the cycle of things, right?
Tony Hawk lives in my city. He's a member of this community. I've seen him around all the time. Tony Hawk's clothes are in Kohl's and in Target now, right? And that's just the nature of the beast. So, that's a really fun conversation. I enjoy watching all of it, but by no means is what I'm going to say affect any of it. So I can comfortably sit back and just talk about it as it is what it is.
Exactly. We have zero influence over any of this, so there's no reason to be angry at it or scared of it or wish it was different. This is just the water we're swimming in.
Speaking of bare knuckle, you have been working pretty hard with Bare Knuckle FC, correct? And Bare Knuckle MMA, which is spearheaded by Jorge Masvidal. I mean, just give me a little something. How incredible of an experience has that all been?
So I commentate BKB, which is a bare knuckle fighting out of London, England. And it's got this old, cool tradition. They aren't still fighting this way, but it's still got that flavor. So it's got this respect-based, the best bare knuckle fighter in the world's name is Jimmy Sweeney. His dad, Jim Sweeney, was a bare knuckle champion, and his grandfather, James Sweeney, was a bare knuckle. It's in their family. Irish travelers and Welsh tough guys and British, and it is its own historic art form. And then you've got Game Bread FC, which is Jorge Masvidal's show, where I get to go in and bring sort of my experience in the bare knuckle world in with my experience in all the different aspects of free fighting and MMA, and it's very visceral, and it's so Jorge Masvidal. It's crazy. Jorge started fighting in backyards. Jorge was fighting with Kimbo Slice. There's all kinds of footage of him fighting in backyards, same as Kimbo Slice, bare knuckle. So Jorge now, and Jorge still, of course, is going to headline or close to headline a pay-per-view in December against Leon Edwards. He's still going to be in that world, but he still gets to go and essentially put on his own concerts and have punk rock bands come out and punch each other in the face. I'm mixing metaphors, but so there's this visceral realness, this rough kind of back to roots kind of nature to what Jorge does with Game Bread FC. And he asked me to commentate, I was honored. I know for many years he's seemed to really enjoy my work, and he said so, and he's been very generous about it. And he was like, when I found out you were an option, I insisted that you come and commentate my shows, which is an honor, and it really does mean a lot to me, and it's fun as hell.
When I first started my combat sports content creation, one of the first podcasts I ever did talked about the history of Jorge Masvidal starting in backyard brawling. For me, I'm part of the YouTube era, right? Like, as YouTube blew up, and fighting is absolutely a big part of that YouTube culture in the beginning. Jorge Masvidal, or Ponytail, right, as they called him, Little Ponytail, or Baby Ponytail, or Ponytail as they called him, he was a massive player in the YouTube world, at least, for me growing up. So funny you mentioned those backyard brawl days. The last thing I wanted to ask about before we get into some crazy sick fights that we have lined up here in the future. Karate Combat. Also really, really cool. I from the outside, I'm able to understand it a little bit. For people that may not know as much, can you give like a 30-second explanation breakdown of what is going on in Karate Combat?
Yes. So if you choose to put any Karate Combat footage in any of this, they'll clear it. I'll just tell them I was on here with you and it's on 1:37 p.m. Yeah, so Karate Combat is real, real hand-to-hand, predominantly stand-up fighting, although there is fighting on the ground, rooted in the historic martial art of karate, presented in an ultra-modern way. So we have actual karatekas fighting a type of fighting. So all fighting, the dynamic of what you see when you see, whether you see Wilder Fury, it is created by the rules and the parameters. So those guys have 3-minute rounds. The ring is this size. You're only allowed to use your fists. The fighting looks that way. In MMA, the rounds are 5 minutes. They're in a cage. You're allowed to use X, Y, and Z. These other things are illegal. The fighting looks a different way. So whatever the fighting that gets produced is created by the parameters that it takes place in. So Karate Combat takes place in a pit with angled walls that are still able to fight with.
Which I love. I love the angled walls.
Yeah, it's super cool. The fighting is rooted in karate. We allow certain things and remove others. For example, you don't kick from the knee to the hip. So thigh kicks, you don't kick. People are like, well, why can't you kick the leg? You can kick the calf. And to some people, they're like, well, that seems weird. Well, things only seem weird when they're unfamiliar to you. It's weird that I can kick you in the head standing, but I can't kick you in the head on the ground in MMA. But after you watched it for 15 years, it doesn't seem weird anymore. There's nothing weird about creating parameters in which something can be done. So the parameters are structured to allow the art of karate to be people who grew up in the art of karate to be able to do well. Although there are Muay Thai fighters, there are kickboxers, and everybody. But it also is positioned in a time travel environment. That's where it gets awesome. Literally, there's a story of Boss Rutan traveling through time and picking us up along the way. And so I get to analyze real fighting in a futuristic high technology environment. So for me, it is just the coolest thing in the world. The fighting is real. The analysis is real, as scientific as I want to make it and as truth-based as I can, but presented in a wild futuristic format. So it's one of the coolest things I've ever seen, and it's cool that I get to do it.
Karate, I feel like the biggest the thing that people love about karate is the discipline and like the technical dynamics of karate. It is about being perfect, correct? And the biggest probably complaint about karate or point karate is the lack of realness to it. Well, now with Karate Combat, you're combining those two things, which is awesome.
Yeah, the thing sort of wrote itself. Like the explanation kind of all made sense at the Olympics when a guy got hit and then was essentially knocked out and couldn't continue, and they made him the gold medalist. That was so definitively like, this is a beautiful martial art, beautiful competition, beautiful art form, a visceral style of fighting. Why the hell is the guy who got laid out the gold medalist? Well, in Karate Combat, we will solve that problem and do it in the dynamic. And it's a wonderful, wonderful experience to be essentially cage side and be able to analyze in real time, and in many cases seconds after it happened, what happened. And it pushes me and my sort of my skills, the things that I love about fighting and the specific things that I do and study and try to get good at. It pushes me to the maximum of what I can do when seconds later I'm standing there and I have to, or I'm tasked with being able to enrich the experience for the audience in real time.
I can almost guarantee doing that analysis in real time will make you a better content creator and analyzer in post-production as well. That having both those options will only benefit you in the other way as well, which is obviously awesome. Go ahead. If you got it, go ahead. I
was going to say is you'll find this in any type of creative endeavor. Making breakdowns that are 3 minutes with making thousands of them. Later, those concepts become instant that I can use in real-time commentary. So I'm sitting at Gamebred FC and I'm commentating a concept that seemed foreign to me 5 years ago that I've now analyzed 500 times on Instagram now is accessible in my mind in real time. This is how we become experts at things. It's a long road, and we never truly master it, but we try to get better and push the boundaries of what's possible in our paradigms.
Just have to constantly try different and new things and challenges and go out of your comfort zone, and it will only make you better in every other facet of life. I do want to do this, Robin, because we said we were going to do 15 minutes. We've already hit 15 minutes, and we have not even gotten into the fights, as we suspected, because this is what we always do. We don't make predictions here, right? We don't say who's going to win, because why the fuck would we watch, Robin? If we could predict who could win, why would we watch? But what we do like to do is look for one thing in each fight that could tell us maybe a bit about the result if you only looked at that one dynamic, right? If I didn't see the judges, if I didn't check Twitter after the fight, and I only looked at this one dynamic, what can that one dynamic tell me about the fight? Let's start with Jorge Masvidal. Why not start with game-bred Masvidal? Leon Edwards, who has been on an absolute tear for 5 straight years now, hasn't gotten every opportunity that he's always wanted or come across, and I think COVID even put a bigger damper on that. But now you've got as big of a shot as you're ever going to get in a division, following up a fight against Nate Diaz. Jorge Masvidal, Leon Edwards, December 11th. I think I'm going to the fight. Robin, what can I look for in that fight that can tell me a bit about the conversation afterwards?
Okay. So we talked about how Jorge, as a teenager, is fighting in real time in backyards. If we are going to truly try to understand what experience does for you, you have to go back and look at the amount of time he spent immersed in fighting, right? The practice of fighting makes you fight better. And the way we describe it limits us. Oh, this guy's a great striker. That doesn't mean anything, right? That's saying the thing and complimenting it. It's nonsense. He's an elite striker. That's nonsense. What's actually happening? Well, his ability to process information, move, see, gather information in real time and allow it to feed into the algorithm of his experience and respond without conscious thought. That's what gets better. And in fact, I'm going to try to find a way to connect this idea to all of these, because this is a big part of what we don't understand about fighting is, Jorge Masvidal becomes more comfortable in the nonsense, and it doesn't become nonsense to him, right? Once that happens, you start to be able to take the speed at which you see and process information and fight, and then add strategy to it, add the wily experience strategy to it. And that's the thing to watch for with Jorge Masvidal, right? Remember when Jorge punched Leon Edwards backstage?
Oh, yeah. And I'm glad you're bringing it up, Robin.
Right? You see it in that, right? When you look at what happened in that exchange, that's where and you know what you're seeing, and you understand how this is learned and felt, and you know Jorge a little. He's my boss in Game Bread. I've analyzed him for a decade or more. And you get insight into the man and the process. You start to understand, that he is using like ancient these are cheap books that you can buy in the store, but they're old concepts. These, old concepts written by a swordsman and Sun Tzu about war. And there's hundreds of books like these, but these are concepts of strategy that are eternal ideas. And when you look at Jorge walking in the back, and the guy's saying something, and he was walking, you'll notice his hands are clasped behind him. This is intentionally non-threatening. It's a lie, right? One of the things, most basic roots of art of war, all warfare is rooted in deception. Jorge Masvidal is walking towards Leon Edwards, who's been beaking him off as he's being interviewed. Jorge has already decided he's going to punch this man in the face, right? So we have 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7 seconds. It's a long time when you're dealing with tenths of a second of processing time. So in that time, this walking towards a man with your hands behind your back, that's some old school Cuban badass shit that Jorge learned when he was a kid. He knows he's going to punch this guy 3, 4 times. slowly walks up. Then you'll notice as he gets closer to it, the left hand, I believe, I haven't seen this footage in probably 2 years. I believe the left hand starts to touch the railing. Now we've introduced this hand. We've taken it. So when I have my hands behind my back, my hands now, for me to punch you, the process of me punching you is I have to now release my hands, move them from the back to the front into a position at which punching is possible. I can also fire them from there, although that's not ideal. And old gangster like, and I use the word gangster in air quotes, like Jorge will know that from experience. So we need to get this hand from hidden misdirection. All warfare is rooted in deception, into a place where it is now in play for me to punch you, but somehow has camouflaged that within your mind's idea to recognize it as a threat. Now it's and when I say this, a person who has spent zero time, unlike Jorge Masvidal, who spent a lifetime, a person who spent zero time would be like, "Oh, this is all nonsense." This is not nonsense. The difference between an expert like Jorge Masvidal and a person who watches the UFC 12 times a year is these things that I'm describing. Now he will introduce it into play on the thing, and then and you'll probably see it explode instantly with a commitment to 4. What do you call it? 3-piece in a soda. So that is 4. With a commitment of 4. All of that is by design. Not that he's like, I'm going to hide my hands, then introduce it into the thing, and then from there explode it. It's just a lifetime of doing it. The amount of times this guy's had to smack somebody in the mouth in an environment that he grew up in different places where somebody has a weapon or whatever, this world has. So now we take that exact thing and we go to Jorge's biggest moment that rocketed him up to the level.
Hands behind the back, leaning casually against the cage, pretending like he's not a threat.
That is not a coincidence either. That is by design. That is, all warfare is rooted in deception. Jorge Masvidal leans back. And him taking those steps and flying, what is now happening? And we examine. So now we're talking about old school badassery and mixed with strategy and art of war. But why does it work? So now we move it into the modern time. The reason it works is because there's a particular amount for the brain, for the cerebral cortex to gather the information of the threat, and then use its experience to tell our motor cortex how to behave. That process takes tenths of a second. The difference of those tenths of a second are now shaved off by me using misdirection to steal. Oh shit, he's doing it. Like that moment for your brain to suddenly go, wait a second, there's a guy flying at me. If that takes half a second, now you're getting kneed unconscious in the shortest time ever in human history. Those are the things to watch for with Jorge Masvidal. What are all those things? What are they ultimately? Are we going to see him do this? Maybe. But it's not about the specific tactic or technique that's being used. It's about a lifetime of these things available to this badass. That's an interesting. And I can tell you one more thing related to this from Nate Diaz versus Leon Edwards. But I'll take a breath first.
I would argue it even goes further than what we're talking about right now, which is the deception, right? The physical deception of what Jorge Masvidal does. It's the loose arms that sometimes drop a little low. It's sometimes, right, the hands behind the back. What Jorge Masvidal does best, in my opinion, a lot, is the blitz, right? There is no one maybe better in the history of MMA at blitzing than Jorge Masvidal. And real quick, Robin, just... It's a perfect example. I think there's an emotional deception with Jorge Masvidal as well. Don't let the smile fool you. Don't let the jokes fool you. Don't let the kind of happy-go-lucky personality of Jorge Masvidal fool you. He is a man of deception in every dynamic of combat.
Yes. And we can, if we like, remove it from strategic deception to emotional deception to conceptual, but it's all the same thing. It's just a philosophy of warfare, right? At the root, it is you can find it in thousands of ways. And here's the problem. Where we will begin to err, especially if we have no actual experience in fighting in cages or whatever, if we point these things out, somebody can say, oh, he's also doing it here, also doing it here. Our minds start to see patterns and we think they're important when they're not always. So that's why certain things are truthfully, we know, and I've asked Jorge about them. Of course, leaning against that cage, all of that is all part of it, right? But these same deceptions, and when Nate Diaz finally clocked Leon, and Leon is capable of all of this too. I'm not picking on Leon Edwards. I'm a huge fan. I've broken down his brother Fabian's work too, and he's a genius as well. It just happens this is the direction of the conversation. If we get to have another one before then, we'll talk about Leon Edwards and some of his specifics. Also, Jorge is my friend and my boss, at least conceptually at Game Bread FC. So I'm biased, but when Nate actually caught him with the big punch in round 5, that's an old school. Jorge talked about when Usman caught him, how much he admired that moment, how he can't be mad at it, how he thinks it's a similar thing. I tell you lies for 4 full rounds about how deep I can punch, about where you are and are not safe. And Nate Diaz is a genius about this, as is Jorge. And of course, this is not unique to these guys. Again, when we talk about Leon Edwards in 3 weeks or whenever, we will talk about some of his specifics. But when Nate hit him, Nate had been telling him lies for 22 minutes about where he's safe from the punch and how dangerous Nate is and isn't. That's an old school, old masters technique. Josh Barnett used to do it all the time, even in Japan. I think it was Pedro Hizo. Fake right hand. Now you think you're safe and you're 10 times deeper and more explosive. Old school master lying. You won't see it from the younger guys necessarily, although to be honest, Sugar Sean plays around with some of these things. There are young guys who start to understand this much younger than they used to. But anyway, these types of deceptions, these are the things that the old masters can do, and us learning about them and digging this. These are not things we can understand in 2 conversations or watching somebody's YouTube videos. This is something we need to spend decades of ourselves. These books and many other like them, I've read and listened to them dozens of times over 15 years to internalize and understand these concepts in different ways and how they relate, as has Jorge, as has Nate Diaz, as has Leon Edwards, as are younger fighters. These are difficult concepts to discuss when somebody is doing commentary or sitting at a desk in an expensive suit, well lit on a sports desk somewhere. But these are the realities. These are the realities of what are happening in fighting. And when you watch Jorge Masvidal, those ornery, grimy old master deceptions are some of the things to watch for.
I could talk about Jorge Masvidal all day long. Just one of my favorite guys of all time. Let us continue, because goodness gracious, our tangents are where the gold is. I truly, truly believe that. Whatever I put down on this stupid piece of paper means absolutely nothing to this conversation. The next 2-3 months are just so loaded with fights, and the last time you came on, we did talk about Canelo Alvarez, but and we talked about what he does so well, his Sergey Kovalev knockout, and your breakdown of it, and he is one of the few athletes that I still feel like I fanboy over. I still feel like a fan of. I'm covering him for 1:37 p.m. I'm not putting on my sports journalism major from Missouri when I watch Canelo Alvarez in awe of his abilities. What I am potentially most impressed with is his evolution as a fighter. And we talked about Canelo Alvarez almost 12 months ago. And I don't even know if he's the same fighter that he was 12 months ago. When you talk about a fighter's evolution, what is it with Canelo Alvarez to where he can now go up from 154, 160, now trying to unify at 168. He's held the belt at 175. He went from being just a hard-punching Mexican kid at 16 years old to now one of the best defensive boxers in the entire world, who can also walk you down and bury you. I watch him as a fan. What do you think of his evolution as a fighter?
So I'm the same, right? Like I, I almost when I almost don't do this anymore, anyways, because these fights are such special moments. Like Canelo Alvarez, and there's 40 humans that fight in all types of fighting that are so special and rare. In those moments, you should never give them up. So if somebody says, "Can you tweet during this?" It's like, no, I cannot tweet during this. This is a wonderful moment. These are wonderful moments where these geniuses have dedicated their entire lives to these moments, and they will never get them back. You should not be fucking tweeting during this, right? I won't do that now, right? Like I see that sometimes you're watching fights and they're like have journalists or analysts or whatever their tweets. It's like, why are you tweeting? This is genius. There's a genius doing things. Can you imagine being at a jazz concert where the great Miles Davis is soloing and you're fucking tweeting? Like, are you out of your mind? Right? But so what is happening? And so if you appreciate gymnastics or javelin or high diving or fighting, you are appreciating the genius of the movement and the genius of what's being created. But for me, a lifelong study of martial arts is about understanding the world and learning about how to be a better husband. And I'm going to have a baby in January and try to become a good father and all of these, how to be a better friend and a good citizen. Like studying fighting is teaching you about the universe. And I'm sure a master, somebody who's searching for mastery in shipbuilding or programming or whatever, can learn about the universe by searching for mastery. So this is not unique to fighting. But when you're watching Canelo Alvarez, what can you learn? You can learn about greatness, but we start to get insight into where that comes from. Like, how did he become so great? Could I be that good of a piano player or baseball catcher or programmer or friend? Like, and so you look at it, and he is literally simply a product of the things that make greatness. Deliberate practice, non-stop deliberate practice, incredible amounts of hard work, improving your ability to improve your ability. And I think that's the nugget of Canelo, right? Anybody can. When I first started to box, I had lost my first 2 MMA fights. I was a submission specialist, and I realized I was getting punched in the face a lot, and I started to box. And so I trained with somebody over and over and over again, and he would throw something, I would slip, bang, slip, bang, slip, thousands and thousands and thousands of repetitions. And one day I'm sparring and a guy threw a punch and I slipped and I hit him. And I couldn't believe it. Like my brain just did that thing. And you realize, oh, okay, this is how that happens. So if I did that same thing forever, I would never become Canelo. Because Canelo got better, and people like Canelo got better out of harvesting the experience, harvesting the training. They gain more from the repetition. They gain more from the information. They gain more from the repetitive practice. So when we're trying to understand why is this fighter, gymnast, runner, cyclist, mountain climber, why are they so good? There's a genetic component, and there is deliberate practice with expert feedback. There's somebody watching this right now who has and I'm not judging. They have no idea how somebody would get better at playing piano, because we're not teaching that in the world. You get better at playing piano or fighting through deliberate practice with expert feedback, analyzing your process, and continuing the job up the mountain. Pushing yourself to limits, finding failures, learning from the setback, and carrying on. Alvarez does all that just like everybody else. He's just better at that. And now he's the best in the world.
First of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
On the child. That is so exciting, and beyond work, beyond your passions of life, which are combat sports or learning. Congratulations, because at the end of the day, there's a short list of things that matter in this world. Mm-hmm. I would argue that is certainly one of them. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Canelo Alvarez in combat sports. There is a very bizarre balance in combat sports that is incredibly difficult to explain. Supreme confidence and incredible humility. How do those two things coexist? Canelo Alvarez will tell you, I am the best boxer in the world. Yet when he goes to the gym every day, which is here in San Diego, and he trains with Eddie Reynoso, who I think is an absolute genius as well, and they're the peanut butter to each other's jelly. And Canelo Alvarez does not walk around that gym or talk to Eddie Reynoso saying, I'm the best boxer in the world.
Yeah.
He listens as if he's not the best boxer in the world. It is the most bizarre catch-22 probably in combat sports, or I guess in anything really. Supreme confidence, incredible humility. It's a bizarre duo.
Yeah, it isn't at all. I love where you're going with this. I love it. It's just so truthful and pure, but it's not weird at all. All the greats, the real greats, the people and the people who become great. The people not who something good happened and then they were at the top of it and then it all fell apart. But true people who get to live long enough to get some level of mastery have this. And it seems that they are not together, but here's the nugget of difference. Humility is a choice, and confidence is a consequence of that choice.
Oh, that is hot. I love that.
So confidence, if created by you, is horseshit. Confidence, if it forms as a result of a lifetime of work, preparation, setback, learning, humility allows you to learn. Hard learning and nonstop work can produce confidence. Confidence is a byproduct of work fueled by humility. So they are connected.
That is so damn good, and it makes a lot of sense. But just if you look at the surface, right, just from the outside, just if you're peeking in through the window, the relationship between humility and confidence is incredibly interesting, to say the least. We talk about, you and I constantly talk about stereotypes, language, sport, where MMA, where combat sports fits into all this. Anthony Joshua, a few weeks ago, suffers a loss to Alexander Usyk. A lot of people are going to criticize him, say, you're not the heavyweight you think you are, or whatever. I think Anthony Joshua is an outstanding addition to the heavyweight division in boxing. I think when you look at the great eras or generations of boxing, they talk about all these fighters, and yet if all those fighters coexisted with each other at once, they would not all be able to be undefeated. That is not possible. They become great because they face each other over and over and take on certain challenges and battles. Anthony Joshua, they say he's not a boxer. They say Alexander Usyk is a boxer. Anthony Joshua is an athlete, or he's a puncher. Why am I the only person who does not give a fuck that Anthony Joshua is not a boxer? Why are people so focused on him not having the perfect jab or the perfect, footwork skills? Why does that matter so much to people?
So, because people are crazy, and we all want to know. I get this weird pushback sometimes when I will spend years to try to try to gain some insight into the truth of how, say, the brain works in a certain moment. And sometimes I'll explain, as best as humanly possible with all the knowledge accessible in the world, combined with my personal knowledge of having learned these things, I'll explain potentially on a low level how the brain works when something happens. And somebody will be like, bro, that's so stupid. All he did was that was a pull counter. It's like, I know that we all want to know things, right? But most of us don't want to actually learn things. So we want to know this. We want to be able to say, and this is not a judgment. This doesn't make us bad people. This is just human nature. We want to be in a bar or a virtual bar on Twitter, and we want to say, this guy's not a good boxer. But there are 60 people in Toronto, where I live, that actually truthfully know about fighting on a high level. And there's probably 900 in America. And there's probably 2,800. Khabib said this before. People ask, why do people say these things? And he's like, there's maybe 800 or 900 humans on planet Earth who actually know fighting the way he does. And none of them are tweeting about it. None of them are expressing their opinion about Joshua's jab. It's people who don't know what a jab is. It's people who think a jab is a thing that was described by a Teddy Atlas or a Joe Rogan or a Robin Black or a whomever in the moment of of television for entertainment purposes, limited by time. And they saw that 29 times or 50 times, and they watched 3 YouTube videos or 12 YouTube videos or 40 YouTube videos, and they think they now know what a jab is. A jab is not a thing that where you step this way and then your hand expresses from here and returns to the thing as your hip moves back and you lower your. A jab is a thing that I throw my hand out and it hits you. And the best jabs in the world don't look like cartoons. They don't look like YouTube videos. The best jabbers in the world. Also, even if that is the best, if we could all agree what is the perfect technical jab today, that will not be true in 4 years or 11 years or 20 years. Because the game, as it changes, how you should and shouldn't do this in an ever-changing dynamic, that's not true. But all of the people that have an opinion on it have no idea, and they'll hear me say that after 40 years of dedicating my life to trying to understand this and trying to find language that I could explain it, and that's my failing. If they don't understand it, I'll continue to try until I can make more sense. But someone will hear me say that and goes, that guy's crazy, bro. He just talks about esoteric things. Why? Because they want to be right. They prefer to know what a jab is, prefer to know what Anthony Joshua is, prefer to live in a world where they know what a vaccine is or a COVID is or a government is or what a Biden is or what a jab is, or they're like, they prefer what CNN is or what 1:37 p.m. is or who Robin Black is. They prefer to live in a world of certainty, but they don't. Most of us don't know anything. And once we get to the point that we realize that we don't know it, I've only studied martial arts for 45 years, and I don't say that facetiously. That's nothing. In the grand scheme of what is possible to be known, I know nothing. So if I know nothing, what does Just Bleed 420 on Twitter know? Nothing, right? Nothing. He knows literally nothing. So people express and in a world of all of us knowing nothing, and learning a little less and gaining less nuanced information, we're also, and this is humility and confidence, we are also overconfident. We think we know. I watched 200 boxing matches. I think I know what a jab is. You actually have no idea what a jab is. You have no idea what Joshua is or is not. But you want to, and you believe you do. And that dynamic informs not just fighting, but news and sports and politics and music and science and everything. And that's the challenge of our generation.
People are hilarious. We can start there, that people are just absolutely hilarious. Lomachenko, who is another person who I watch as a fan, where I just can't get enough. I'm in awe of what they do. He breaks the quote unquote rules of boxing all the time, but it's deceptive, right? If that jab that Anthony Joshua had was perfect or textbook or exactly the way, wouldn't everyone know that it's coming and it wouldn't work, right? What makes this work is that it is not normal, and you want to break the rules. You have to do new things.
Who was he was a star of the Detroit Pistons, and he later was a coach, Isaiah Thomas. Let me tell you an Isaiah Thomas story in a second. Go on.
I love Isaiah Thomas, so I'm very excited to hear you say this. I'm 24 years old, and I mentioned this in every fucking podcast, so people are going to say, oh, Bo's 24 years old. He's said that for the 15th time in a row. I am the first to admit I have no idea what is going on in that cage. I am doing my best every day to understand more and more, because I want to have that certainty, but I can't understand it. There's no way a 24-year-old, a 20-year-old, a 30-year-old person could actually understand what is going on in a combat sports setting. I mean, you can't accept anything really in terms of knowledge until you're 8 years old anyways, right? Like, you can start training then, but I have other interests in life as well. So it is impossible for me, but I am going to try my absolute best to understand, to learn, and maybe provide some insight to people. Robin, I'm good to wrap up. I want to finish with this Isaiah Thomas story.
So when Conor McGregor was fighting Floyd Mayweather, Isaiah Thomas, Floyd's father, seemed very interested in me, Floyd Senior, and we were chatting. And a lot of the things that were going on around that time was a time where the world was changing, right? And we are more in it now than ever. But I remember looking at and your role starts, and my role today is the truth. Like that's what I want to spend my time. What is truthful? What is actually happening? Whereas at that time, I hadn't yet reached that point where I thought provoking was good, or and lots of people still do that. So no judgments. People like to say extreme things.
I understand that battle, right? As someone trying to create a career and garnish views, and at times I face that same battle. I very much understand.
Trust yourself, because actually at the things that have gained the most short-term followers for me is if I get into even 10 minutes of conflict with somebody else in my business, and almost always it would be started by me because I'm tired or grumpy or whatever. Because if somebody else does, I usually just not grumpy and serene and learning about the world, and I'm kind in return. But every now and again I do that once a year, and it grows all my stuff. Or when I said Conor McGregor is going to for sure knock out Floyd Mayweather, nothing lit up all of my systems more than that. People jumped in, they were arguing, and you're an idiot and whatever. And I remember doing it at that time. I was working in a television channel, and I had a producer that I trusted very much, and I still do. I very much like him. And he's like, look, man, try to say provocative things, say extreme things. And I remember once saying, what's his name? The Polish hammer or the Russian hammer, Artem Lobov. I remember once saying at the same day he told me that, I'm like, within a year, Artem Lobov will be challenging for the 145-pound division. And people were lighting up the YouTube channel. He was like, see, say stuff like Robin said. And I remember thinking, I don't think this is what I'm about. But same thing. It's like, Conor's going to for sure knock out Floyd Mayweather. When I said that, all my shit exploded, right? But so Floyd's dad was really kind of interested in me, and Chael, and people could kind of see that I was experimenting with this kind of idea. Because truthfully, I know fights are not predictable. And the more you know about them, the more impossible it is. So Isaiah Thomas comes up to start talking to me, and we shoot something for TSN, and it was long, and it was really interesting. And he's like, I find you to be really interesting. He said, you seem very intelligent. Tell me what you're thinking. And I remember just turning to Isaiah, and who was that point guard who was shooting from 3 points that scored like crazy in 2018? And
Steph Curry.
Steph Curry, yeah. And I said, so Isaiah, correct me if I'm wrong, right? I said, Steph Curry, is he the best player right now? And this is at that time, he's like, yeah, Steph Curry is the best player right now. I said, correct me if I'm wrong, but he shoots free throws from places that nobody else does, that are typically considered to be, low percentage. He goes, yes, that's true. And I said, so because it's low percentage, nobody trains to defend them for years and years and years because nobody's throwing from there. And he goes, yeah, that's true. And I said, so somewhere this young man believed this is not arbitrarily low percentage. If I work my brains out, it could be low percentage because everybody else has believed it's low percentage. But what if I turn it into, for me, a higher percentage, and I start shooting it? It isn't just I can hit them. It's they're not ready to defend them. And of course, that during that period, that's what happened. And Isaiah Thomas is looking at me, he's like, right. And I said, well, what if boxing's like that? And he just got right into it. And that was the point. The point wasn't, and that right then was where I started really exploring this idea. One, I was pushing this thing, and it paid off like crazy. But I didn't like it. I didn't like the idea of arguing or creating debate or misrepresenting truth. The truth is, fights cannot be predicted. And if anyone predicts 1,000 of them, the most they're going to get, or let's say 5,000, the most they'll get right is 54% of them, because it is not possible to predict them, right? You can predict them 2 rounds in. You can predict them 1 round in better. You can predict them 20 minutes before better than you could the day before. The day before maybe 2% better than a month before, like the weather, but you still cannot do it. But right at that moment, that was when I started to kind of realize, okay, wait a second. The point here isn't MMA versus boxing. The point here is, what are these things? What is a jab? What is a punch? Yes, I realize that 100 years or 200 years or 500 years have led to a particular choice, but that doesn't mean it's right. In 50 years, it'll be different. In 4 years, it'll be different. And when it is different and somebody goes from jumping on a high jump with the leg up to flopping, the day it's different, we all change everything. When somebody starts winning this way, we stop fighting like this. But this is not definitively the end. We are simply at a point in an ever-changing timeline. And our point is no more important than any other point. Boxing is not fully defined. There is no such thing as wrestling or karate. These are just constructs that we invent. 200 years in the future, they'll all just be practice methods. Nobody will be arguing whether boxing is better than karate, because it'll all just be understood to be a part of fighting. But this is what it is to dedicate your life to trying to understand these things. And it goes right back to what we said at the beginning. The idea of these narratives and these languages, the language of sport, the language of sport broadcasting. These are all boxes. This is astrology. We're trying to figure out what is astronomy. And we will know that if we keep an open mind and we keep learning and we keep searching for truth. And it starts with what you just said. You know nothing. And that's already further along than somebody who thinks they do. And that's why you'll keep learning.
It is all an effort to understand, right? People just want to understand and hold themselves probably in a pedestal in some capacity over the surrounding people or their peers or the people in their work office when they're getting a coffee in the kitchen and the cafeteria room. And, oh, did you see Floyd Mayweather over the weekend? And you want to have that conversation. It's all an effort to understand. Robin, 51 minutes. We said 15 minutes, and that is how we roll, my man. Thank you so much for the time. We will gladly push out a ton of these clips. It's going to be so much fun. The next few months are loaded. We got to keep doing this over and over. We got to have this conversation more often, man. You're a man. You're the rock star. Look forward to talking again.
My pleasure, brother. It's awesome seeing you. 3 or 4 weeks. This time we'll talk more about Leon Edwards than we did Jorge Masvidal. It's only fair.
Yes, we will. Yes, we will. What's the catchphrase, Robin?
Enjoy the hostilities, my friends.
Oh, I love hearing that. Take it easy, man.